She didn't look up when they left her there. The flap of the hide curtain whispered shut behind the last elder, leaving only firelight and silence in the dim lodge. The girl sat on the edge of the bed, if it could be called that, where soft pelts had been laid carefully over woven mats. She was still in the plain dress they'd given her at the outpost, her own torn one burned along with her father's wagon. Her hands trembled in her lap, brown with dust, cracked from travel. She didn't wipe her tears. They weren't the kind that stopped easily. Outside, the drums had quieted. The marriage feast was over, but inside, the weight of what had just happened pressed on her chest like a stone. She was a gift. No, a bargain. A settler girl given to an Apache warrior to keep the peace after a winter of bloodshed. "Don't fight it," the magistrate had said. "You're young. You'll survive." But survive didn't mean live. Her shoes were still on. Dusty, frayed, the leather so stiff from river crossings and rocky hills they hardly bent. She didn't dare remove them. She didn't dare move at all. And then he stepped in. Quiet as snow. The warrior, her husband. He didn't say anything, just paused near the entrance, eyes unreadable. He wasn't as old as she'd feared, not scarred or cruel. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with black hair tied at his neck and a band of red leather circling his brow. He looked at her, not at her body, not with hunger, but at her face. And that somehow made it harder to breathe. She couldn't stop herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I'm not what you wanted. I know I'm not—" Her voice cracked. "I'm not pretty." He didn't move for a long time. Then, wordlessly, he walked forward. She flinched, but he didn't reach for her arms or her waist. He dropped to one knee before her like it was the most natural thing in the world, and without a word, he touched the laces of her right shoe. She froze as he untied the hardened knots. The leather came away with a dry gasp, and her foot, red, blistered, filthy, trembled in the firelight. Still without speaking, he reached for a cloth, dipped it in a bowl beside the bed, and began to wash her foot gently, one stroke at a time. He didn't glance up, didn't ask anything of her, didn't even look for thanks, just kept his head bowed, his touch reverent. When he finished, he set the cloth aside, stood, and turned to tend the fire, giving her space. But she couldn't stop staring at the wet print her foot had left on the ground. No one had ever washed her feet before. No one had ever made her feel sacred. She didn't sleep that night, not even when the fire faded to coals and the wind outside quieted to a low hum. The fur pelts beneath her softened her bones, but her mind raced, tangled with questions she couldn't ask. The warrior had laid a second blanket nearby, not touching hers, but close enough she could hear his breathing, slow and even. He hadn't tried to speak, hadn't tried to touch her. He just existed there, like a mountain, steady and unshaken. When morning came, she expected orders, demands, rules about what a wife must do, but he left without a word, letting the flap fall gently closed behind him. She sat for hours, unsure whether she was supposed to follow or stay put. Eventually, a girl around her age entered. Apache, with soft brown eyes and a braid down her back. She said nothing, but handed her a folded garment made of soft deerskin and motioned gently to her dress. The settler girl, she still thought of herself that way, though her old life had vanished, hesitated. "Do I have to wear this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. The girl didn't answer, just smiled a little and left. That afternoon he returned. She hadn't eaten, hadn't moved much, but she had changed, finally, into the deerskin, and somehow it felt like shedding something rotten. The warrior entered holding a wooden bowl filled with something that steamed. Beans, squash, herbs. He offered it without speaking, sitting across from her while she ate. She could hardly swallow under his gaze, but he didn't seem to judge. He only watched with quiet intensity, like trying to understand something without words. Finally, she broke. "You don't want me here, do you?" Her voice trembled. "This wasn't your choice." Still, he said nothing, but this time, his eyes didn't look away. He reached slowly into the leather pouch at his belt and pulled something out, a string of small carved stones, smoothed by time, warm from his body. He set it in her palm. "My sister wore this before her wedding," he said finally. His voice was low and deep, like wind through canyon walls. "She died last winter." She looked down at the stones. They were shaped like river pebbles, but painted with fine, simple patterns. "Why give it to me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." He paused, then said, "Not yet." That was all. He rose again, stepped outside, and left her holding the necklace in a hand that didn't seem like hers anymore. That night, she placed it on the bed beside her, between them, and slept for the first time since the world had changed. 3 mornings later, she awoke to find the women of the village gathered outside the lodge, speaking in soft tones and carrying bundles of red cloth, feathers, and flower sprigs. Her husband, she still couldn't bring herself to say his name aloud, was nowhere in sight. But the girl with the long braid returned, this time not with clothing, but with purpose. She motioned for the settler girl to follow, and without knowing why, she obeyed. They walked through the village, past low-slung huts and smoking cook fires, past elders with faces creased like bark, and children who peeked from behind baskets. She felt every eye on her. When they reached the clearing by the river, the women encircled her. None of them spoke her language, but they didn't need to. They offered her a shallow bowl of water, into which they had placed something fragrant and green. One woman motioned for her to wash her face, another combed her tangled hair with gentle fingers. A third painted a line down the part of her hair with a mixture of red clay and oil. She didn't understand what was happening until she saw the cloth, soft and crimson, stitched with bone-colored thread, unfolded before her. A dress, a ceremonial one, not for labor or hunting or sleep. She stammered, confused. Why are you dressing me like this?" But again the answer came in looks, not words. As they helped her step into the garment, she realized this was their version of a wedding. A real one. Not the trading of hands between angry white men and stoic warriors. Not a treaty signed in the shadows. This was for them. For her. For him. She was being welcomed, not handed over. It startled her, then broke something inside that had been frozen since she arrived. By the time she was led back through the village, her cheeks were damp. At the lodge, he was waiting, freshly washed, wearing new buckskin that clung to his frame like armor. His long hair was tied behind his neck with red string. The elders stood nearby. When he saw her, he didn't stare, didn't smirk, didn't look away. He bowed his head once, respectfully, as if he knew how heavy the moment was for her. One of the elders spoke a few words in Apache, slow and rhythmic, then placed a carved staff between them. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the gesture. Step across, and you are both part of this now. And she did. Her bare feet crossed the line, her hands trembling. He reached for them, held them. Not tightly, not possessively, just enough that she didn't feel alone. When the elder finished speaking, the villagers let out a soft murmur of approval, and then the two of them were left in silence again. That night, she sat on the bed, not crying this time, but unsure. And again, he knelt. Wordlessly, He took her feet in his hands and untied the leather cords, brushing off the dust that had gathered from her trembling walk through the village. His touch was gentle, reverent, like she was made of silk. She closed her eyes, and for the first time didn't feel ugly. She didn't know how to act married. In her world, wives folded linens, bore children, and kept their heads down at dinner while their husbands talked business and politics. But here, nothing looked the same. There were no linens, no parlor, no Sunday pews, just woven mats, carved bowls, fires that never went out, and people who communicated more with glances and offerings than with declarations. Her husband, this Apache warrior who hadn't touched her without purpose or permission, treated her less like a wife and more like a guest still deciding whether to stay. He brought her berries in a carved wooden cup that morning, leaving it by her feet with a nod. Later, when she went to the river to wash, she turned to find him quietly placing a thin woven shawl on a rock nearby in case she was cold. He said nothing, just walked away again. But something was shifting inside her. It wasn't that she was falling in love, not yet, but that the fortress she'd built inside her chest was no longer quite so high. He had asked for nothing, demanded nothing, not her obedience, not her touch, not even her gratitude. She thought of the way the man who'd arranged her trade, a man from her town council, had spat the words, "This will keep them off our land," like she was a blood payment, like she didn't have a name. But this man, this Apache, he didn't even seem to need one from her. He had his own name, of course, Nantan, but he'd never forced her to say it. That night, sitting near the fire, outside their lodge, she watched him as he carved something into a strip of bark, his brow furrowed in thought, his fingers moving with slow precision. She didn't ask what he was making, just watched. And then, after what felt like hours, he looked up and said her name, softly, the first time he'd spoken it. May. Just that. As if he'd been tasting the sound of it in his mind for days, and only now dared speak it aloud. She blinked. "You know my name?" He nodded once and said no more. The fire cracked between them. Later, in the quiet of their shelter, she lay on her side, not touching him, but aware of every breath he took. "I thought you'd hate me," she whispered into the dark. "You didn't ask for this, I didn't either." No answer. Just the rhythm of firelight against the lodge walls and the steady sound of his breath. But when she turned over, slowly, hesitantly, she saw him lying there, still awake, eyes open, watching her without judgment. His gaze didn't hold pity. It didn't hold expectation. Just presence. She didn't speak again, and neither did he. But the quiet between them no longer felt hollow. It felt full, as if words might ruin something sacred taking root. That night, when sleep finally came for her, it did so without tears. And when she woke, her shoes were already cleaned and set by the doorway. May had started to notice that the women watched her, not cruelly, not with disdain, but with a quiet patience she didn't know how to answer. They didn't rush her, didn't crowd. But every time she fetched water or stepped outside, she caught their eyes and the smallest nods. Not greetings, not invitations, just acknowledgments. As if they saw her, truly saw her, and were waiting to see what she'd do with that visibility. That morning, Nantan left before sunrise. He didn't explain where he was going, only handed her a small bundle wrapped in hide and motioned towards the hearth, where fresh embers waited to be fed. She waited until he was gone before she opened it. Inside were corn cakes wrapped in cloth, a strip of smoked meat, and a tiny carved comb, one clearly too delicate for his use. It looked like something carved with care, maybe for a daughter, maybe a sister. But now it was hers. And just like that, she began brushing her hair again. She didn't do much else that day. She swept the dust around their fire pit, rinsed a blanket in the river, helped a child who'd dropped her doll. It wasn't until the sun reached its highest point that the older woman appeared. Tall, wrapped in layers of fabric the color of sand and stone, she stepped into May's shadow without warning. Her face was lined but calm, and her dark eyes studied May like a puzzle. "I am Nasha," she said. Her voice was not hard, but neither was it soft. "You live with Nantan now." May nodded slowly. Yes, I do. You eat our food, sleep in our shelter." Another nod. "You do not yet walk among us." This made May freeze, not in fear, but in shame, because it was true. She had existed among them, like a ghost wearing white skin and guilt. "I don't know what I'm allowed to do," May admitted, "or who I am here." Nasha didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled something from the pouch at her waist, a beaded loop of some kind, and held it out. "Tomorrow, you sit in the circle, with the women, if you want." She placed the loop in May's hand. It was smooth, warm from the sun. "No one will ask you to speak, but if you stay silent too long, your heart will dry." Then she walked away. May stared down at the beads in her palm, their colors earthy and soft. She didn't know what the circle was, or what was expected. But she knew one thing. It was not an order. It was a door. That night when Nantan returned, he placed a fresh rabbit on the table and sat across from her. She wanted to tell him about the woman, the circle, the beads, but instead she held up the comb. "Thank you," she said. "It's beautiful." He smiled. Barely, but it was real. "It was my mother's," he said. Then, after a pause, "Now it's yours." She held it tighter. Something in her chest flickered. That night, when she lay down beside him, she didn't curl away. She turned toward him and whispered, "If I sit with them, will they let me belong?" He didn't open his eyes, but he answered, "Only if you choose to." The morning sun was gentle, the kind that didn't press but invited, and May stood outside the lodge holding the beaded loop Nasha had given her. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper, the kind of fear that comes when you're about to step out of invisibility. Nantan had gone again, saying only, "North Trail." 2 days. That meant it was her choice now. No translator, no quiet presence beside her. Just May and the circle she didn't understand. Still, she followed the distant laughter of children and the smell of simmering maize toward the eastern edge of the village, where the women gathered under a low-hanging tree. They sat in a ring, cross-legged, busy with tasks, threading beads, grinding herbs, twisting fibers into rope. No one looked up when she arrived, but she felt them notice, felt the silence bend around her like wind around stone. May hesitated on the edge. For a second, her feet wouldn't move. But then a little girl, maybe 5, with twin braids and fire in her smile, stood and walked over. She took May's hand and tugged it without a word. The circle opened, and May stepped in. No ceremony, no introductions, just a space made for her, and the warmth of bodies who had learned to survive by leaning together. Nasha was there, of course, and beside her, a younger woman whose eyes flicked curiously to May's pale skin. Another offered a thread spindle. It was a simple motion, but May took it with reverence. She hadn't spun thread before, not like this, but her fingers remembered old habits. Mending dresses, repairing socks, braiding her mother's hair. Different motions, same care. After some time, a quiet voice beside her said, "I'm Tiva." May glanced over. The younger woman, perhaps 20, with a necklace made of river stones and sharp eyes that saw everything. "May," she whispered. Tiva nodded. "Your husband is not unkind." May blinked. Number he's not. That helps? Tiva paused, then reached into a small basket and pulled out a length of soft, dyed fabric. You don't have to wear their dresses, but you shouldn't wear white here. It scares the little ones. May looked down at her faded wedding shift, now dirt-streaked and worn. She hadn't thought of how it might appear. Thank you, she said, taking the cloth. Tiva shrugged, but there was softness in it. You can sew? A little. Good, we'll teach you the rest. Hours passed without measure. Laughter rose like birdsong. At one point, a baby was passed to May without explanation. She froze, heart racing, but then the child curled against her like he belonged there. And she didn't let go. When the sun began to lean westward, Nasha stood. Come again tomorrow, she said to May, as if it had already been decided. May nodded, swallowing hard. Her throat ached, not from silence, but from the effort of holding back tears. As she walked back to her lodge, the fabric tucked under her arm, the baby's warmth still lingering against her chest, May realized she hadn't thought once that day about being given away, or being unwanted. The circle hadn't healed her, but it had started something. A slow stitching. A gathering of the self she'd forgotten she could be. That night, before sleep took her, she whispered into the dark, Thank you, Nantan, for leaving me long enough to find the women. She didn't know if he heard, but she felt the stillness shift, like the whole lodge had exhaled. May had not seen him in 3 days, not since she'd stepped into the circle of women, not since she'd sewn her first strand of beadwork onto the soft garment Tiva had given her. But that morning, as she bent beside the stream, rinsing the day's linen, she saw movement between the trees. Broad shoulders, leather boots, a braid swaying down his back. Nantan. He did not call to her. He simply crouched beside the riverbank, unstrapping a water pouch and filling it, his movements slow, deliberate. May watched in silence, unsure if he'd even noticed her. But when he stood, he turned, and his eyes locked on hers. For a moment, they didn't move. Then Nantan offered the faintest nod and turned into the woods, walking slowly enough for her to follow if she chose. She did. She wiped her hands, gathered her skirt, and stepped onto the path behind him. He said nothing, nor did she. The forest canopy flickered above, casting gold over dirt and moss and rock. Their footsteps were the only sound, his quiet, grounded, hers lighter but steady now. After a while, the path widened, and Nantan slowed until they walked side by side. Still no words. May glanced at him, expecting the silence to feel awkward, but it didn't. It felt full, like a fire that doesn't crackle but warms just the same. I sat with the women, she said finally. Her voice was softer than she intended. I made thread. Nantan's lips curved, just a little, like he didn't want her to see. Good, he said. They have many ways to teach. They do, she nodded. They gave me a different dress. He looked down briefly, then forward again. You look strong in it. May laughed, quiet, surprised by her own sound. I didn't expect that word. It's the right one. A bird darted overhead. The breeze picked up. May's hand brushed his once, by accident, and neither of them pulled away. A little farther on, they reached a clearing. A wooden frame stood there, half-built, its beams lashed and lifted in a perfect square. For who? She asked, pointing. Nantan didn't look at it. For you, if you stay. Her breath caught. She didn't answer. Not yet. He didn't press. You should decide when the thaw comes, he said. By then the stream will rise. If you stay, we finish the roof together. If not... He looked at her then, not unkindly. I'll finish it alone. May nodded, her fingers curling against her palm. They turned and began the walk back. On the way, they passed a small child gathering sticks. Nantan bent to hand him a stray one from the path. The boy smiled, not afraid, not even surprised. "They know you," May said. "You're good to them." Nantan glanced at her sideways. "No one is born knowing how to be gentle," he said. "You learn or you don't." May stared at him, something sharp and soft rising in her throat. When they reached the lodge, he stopped. "I go again tomorrow. West Trail." "You go a lot," she said. "There are things to bring, things to make right." She looked down, then up. "You always come back." "I do." He held her gaze a beat longer. "Because you're here." Then he walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway, heart pounding, feeling less like a visitor in his world and more like a part of it. The wind shifted that evening. The cold came down hard from the ridgeline, biting sharper than any other night May had endured. Inside the lodge, Tiva tucked her baby into pelts, whispering prayers in her native tongue, while the other women whispered news from the hunting party. Nantan was late returning. May sat near the doorway, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the flame flicker low. It had burned down too fast tonight, as if even the fire knew something was wrong. No one said the word out loud, but fear hovered over every breath. When the last ember died, May stepped outside. She didn't ask permission. She just moved into the darkness, boots crunching frost, her hands buried deep in her sleeves. The forest loomed silent, but not empty. The air was full of cold and something else. Expectation. She made it to the edge of the clearing before stopping. Her eyes scanned the trees. Nothing. Her lips trembled. "You said you'd come back," she whispered into the wind, voice swallowed instantly. She took another step, then another, until the lodge was only a memory behind her. And then, hoofbeats, faint, not far. She turned. Through the darkness, a shape emerged, large, steady, familiar. Nantan. He rode alone, snow-dusted, his braid half unraveled, a cut on his temple, but upright, alive. May didn't run to him. She waited until he dismounted and walked the last steps himself. "You're late," she said, voice cracking despite her steadiness. "Yes." "You're bleeding." "Yes." "Are you hurt?" "Only in the places that matter least." May looked at him in the darkness. "You said you'd come back." "And I did." He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "I had to find something first." He reached into the small sack tied at his belt and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. Slowly, reverently, he opened it, revealing a pair of soft doeskin shoes, hand-stitched with beaded sunbursts across the toes. May gasped. "You made these?" "Not me, my sister. I asked her to make them for a woman who walks beside me, not behind." He dropped to one knee, not with ceremony, but with care, and lifted her foot, slipping off the worn boot. Her sock was damp, frayed at the heel. He didn't flinch. He peeled it away and fitted the new shoe gently around her foot. Then the other. She stood still, eyes wide, throat tight. "You're barefoot," she said. "It's freezing." "I walked here with them in my coat," he said simply. "You needed them more." May stared at the shoes on her feet, the man kneeling in front of her, and something broke open in her chest. Not pain, something warmer, something terrifying. "Nantan, you don't need to say anything." He looked up at her. "But I will. I see you, May, as you are, and you are not a burden. You are not shame. You are not ugly. You are the woman I would build a roof for. Twice." She choked on a laugh, a sob, maybe both. He rose slowly, towering again, but somehow gentler now. She stepped closer, until the tips of their shoes touched. "Then let's build it," she said. "Together." He exhaled, nodding once. And as they walked back toward the sleeping village, her hand found his in the dark. And this time, she didn't let go. At dawn, the village began to stir, unaware that everything had already changed. Children chased chickens near the cooking pits while smoke curled lazily into the gray morning. May stood beside Nantan at the center fire, where the elders gathered once each moon to speak of land, spirit, and survival. Today, though, the circle was tighter. Tiva stood with her child in arms. Two older men, faces carved deep with time, sat wrapped in layered robes of buffalo hide. Nantan hadn't told her what would happen, only that it mattered she stand with him. When the oldest among them, a man called Sika, lifted his hand for silence, May felt her chest tighten. "We see you," Sika said, eyes steady on her. "But the question is, how do you see yourself?" The fire popped. May swallowed. She wanted to hide, wanted to vanish, but Nantan's hand stayed at her back, not pressing, only present. So she stepped forward. "I was given," she said quietly. "Traded. For peace. I came here angry and ashamed. I thought I was only what was left behind." The elders didn't blink. May took another breath. "But your women gave me warmth. Your children gave me laughter, and he—" She glanced at Nantan, whose expression remained quiet but unreadable. "He gave me time. I know I am not Apache. I know I came from a place that does not understand you. But I want to learn. If you will have me, I want to stay. Not as a peace offering, but as part of this." For a long time, no one spoke. The fire crackled. Then the younger elder leaned forward and spoke a single word. "Dacha." Belonging. A murmur went up around the circle. Tiva nodded solemnly. And Sika, with his eyes still on May, said, "Then you are no longer guest, no longer burden. You are part of the fire now. Keep it well." May let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Nantan placed a hand over her shoulder, warm and steady. "You spoke truth," he whispered. "They respect that more than bloodlines." That evening, as the village gathered for a small feast, someone brought out a drum. Children danced, women sang, and May found herself beside the fire, not outside it. Nantan carved meat from a spit and handed her the first piece without ceremony. She smiled and took it. Later, when the stars filled the sky, he sat beside her on the same rock they'd once passed in silence. "I'm glad you stayed," he said low. "So am I," she replied, leaning into his shoulder. The drumbeat slowed, the fire dimmed, but May no longer feared the dark. She had stepped through it and found herself still whole, maybe even more than whole. She didn't know what the next moon would bring, but she knew one thing clearly now. She had not been given away. She had been found. May woke to bird song and the scent of juniper smoke drifting softly through the lodge. Her body was still, but her heart beat like she'd run a long way and finally stopped, somewhere safe. The blanket Nantan had covered her with during the night still held a hint of his scent, warm and quiet. She rose slowly and stepped outside barefoot, the earth cool beneath her soles. The village moved gently, women carrying water, children running between drying racks, old men stretching toward the rising sun. No one stared, no one whispered. For the first time since arriving, May realized they saw her not as the outsider, not as the pale girl who came wrapped in shame and dust, but as May. Just May. Nantan stood near the horses, speaking to a young boy in soft tones. When he saw her, he smiled, not broadly, not with fanfare, but with something deeper. She walked to him, and without asking took the reins from his hand to help. He didn't stop her. That evening, Tiva came to her with a bundle. "This was mine," she said, "before my daughter grew." Inside was a dress, soft doeskin with beadwork May didn't dare touch. "You don't have to wear it," Tiva said, "but it would be good if you did." May wore it that night. The village gathered again, not for council this time, but for celebration. There was no marriage ceremony as she'd imagined back in the settlement. No priest, no veil, no ring, only a circle of people she had learned to love, a fire that would never judge her, and Nantan, who waited as if he had always known she would say yes without a word. And she did. Not aloud, not in a speech, but in the way she stepped beside him and took his hand, palm to palm. It was enough. A child wove a single red thread around their wrists, a quiet custom of unity, and the elders watched with eyes that held storms and seasons. May didn't cry, not because she wasn't moved, but because there was nothing left to cry for. No more shame to shed, no more fear to hide. Just peace, just belonging. When the stars bloomed across the sky and the fire softened to glowing coals, Nantan brought a basin of warm water and knelt once more before her. She blinked. Again? He looked up. Always. And as he washed her feet, not to cleanse, not to comfort, but to honor, May reached down, cupped his face, and whispered, "I see you now." He smiled. "And I see you." No one cheered. No one needed to. Their silence was the loudest blessing of all. From far off, a coyote howled. The world kept spinning, indifferent and wild. But for May, everything had changed. She had walked from rejection into reverence, from traded shame to sacred love. She had sat alone on a wedding bed, crying. But tonight, she rose chosen. Not because she was beautiful, not because she was fixed, but because she was finally seen, and in the seeing, loved, fully, quietly, forever.